Welcome, low ego action heroes. This is Debbie Levitt from deltacx.com. We're a full service CX and UX consultancy. We do projects, training, and consulting. And welcome to episode 177. It'll be about UX research, freelancing, and consulting. And we'll get there in a moment. But first, as always, thanks to all of the past, present, and future people who are supporting the YouTube channel by clicking join on YouTube. Totally optional, but I'm always grateful. Yes, I haven't updated this in a month. YouTube makes it so hard, so I will have to put that on the to-do list, but thanks to everybody. Hey, Sophie, good to see you here. What else was I going to say? Oh, yes, I am using a new microphone, so if it doesn't sound quite right, please give me some tips on what I need to fix about it, because I can't hear it. You tell me. It is my first time trying my Bluetooth earbuds on this, so please put up with all of my new technology, everybody. Okay, that having been said, let's jump on in with our special guest. You've met her before, but let's get to know her just in case. Michele Ronsen, tell us about you.
Hi, everyone. Great to be back. Thanks, Debbie. I am a user research educator and a practitioner in the space. I've been independent for the last 12 years. Many people have been asking me what it's like to become an independent, how to become an independent, pros and cons about independence. I also lead the Ask Like a Pro user research workshop series, and many more students are asking for aspects of that to be incorporated into the program. So I thought it would be nice to come on and talk about it.
Yes, thank you so much for doing that. And hello to, we said Sophie and Alana and Credence. And I forgot, this is totally irrelevant, but I forgot to brag that I finally got a vMix t-shirt. This is the streaming software I use, and I'm a super fan. And you can't get a t-shirt, you have to win their contest. So anyway, for those people who were following the earlier show where I was trying to win their contest, I got it. Okay, so yes, exactly. I've got my vMix t-shirt and it doesn't fit me at all, and I'm still excited. A hashtag not sponsored. I just love vMix. Okay, so Michele, let's talk about freelancing and consulting. I think let's just get really simple first. Not everybody even knows what freelancing and consulting would mean. What does that mean? How is that different than a normal job?
Sure. So I think when most people think about a normal job, they think about a full-time or part-time employment where they are working for an organization. It could be a corporation, it could be a nonprofit, it could be in the government sector, and someone is paying you a fixed amount, either by the hour or with salary, and there are typically some sort of benefits that are associated with that. It could be healthcare, paid time off. It might be discounts on products or services that the organization offers, things like that. It might be stock options. Alternatively, freelance to me is different from consulting also. Freelance typically means you're working as an independent on shorter term projects. Could be, in a variety of sectors. It could be in a for-profit or a nonprofit area. And you're typically working on either an hourly rate, a project rate, or a retainer. But you are not salaried. You are not an employee of that organization. There is a legal difference in your relationship with the entity that's hiring you. We'll pause there.
Yeah, thank you. And I also want to remind our audience that we've done a number of shows here on the YouTube channel about freelancing just in general. And I know today we're going to focus on research, but if you are thinking about freelancing or trying to start your own little agency or company, please go to YouTube and write Delta CX Freelance or Delta CX Freelancer, freelancing. Get those keywords into YouTube and you should be able to find a number of videos we've done, from the micro lesson I did on how I plan my projects to the show we did in Easter 2022 with my uncle, who's a lawyer in New York, who talked about why it's important to have a contract and what that contract should say and why you don't just want a handshake deal and things like that. So just know that this is kind of one in a in a random series of shows related to this. One thing I'd like to ask your opinion on, because I know opinions on this vary, is people often ask, should I be charging an hourly or day rate, or should I do a flat project fee? What tends to be your advice?
I think this is highly controversial. For me, what works best and what I prefer is a monthly retainer. Um,
Ah,
I don't work hourly at all. I haven't worked hourly in years. So if it's I'll either do a flat project fee or a monthly retainer. That being said, I started off tracking my time hourly, and it had many benefits. So for years, I had to track my time, and I learned how long things would typically take. And then that was instrumental in helping me build estimates for project fees and things like that. Um, I don't like working hourly for a bunch of reasons. Some of them are that what I can do in an hour is very different from what someone else can do in an hour. But what I might be able to do in that hour took me 20 years to learn, and that value is much higher. So I don't necessarily think an hourly rate is commensurate. Um, with some of those things. But there's lots of different, work structures. Hourly is typically based on time and materials also. And I don't like watching the clock. So I do some of my best work like on a walk or in the shower or, while cooking dinner. But most importantly, I don't think hourly takes into account the years of expertise. It's also no guarantee in terms of cash flow, and there's no incentive to, really do your best work because you're always, sort of on the clock. Um, I could go off on that.
okay. Well,
What's your opinion? What's your
we'll
opinion?
cut that for now. And Sophie is commenting, the monthly retainer seems to be a US model. Not heard of anyone doing it in Europe so far, nor have I come across projects where it would be appropriate yet. And just for the point counterpoint, everything Michele says is valid. I've been doing this for decades and I still love the hourly approach. And again, I've got my own reasons for it, but ultimately each person has to do what makes sense for them, their business, their time, how they value their time. Obviously, I'm charging a certain amount per hour that I feel is good for the value of my time. I haven't been able to get a retainer from anybody yet, so that hasn't seemed available to me. And a lot of my clients end up feeling a lot more confident in the project because I can say, hey, here's exactly the work we're going to do and how many hours we're going to spend on it. And so they end up feeling a little more confident that they know what they're getting. But let me read a couple of the things that are popping up. Anthony C says, I'd love to learn whether it's appropriate for people. Oh, he's asking our question for us, Michele. I'd love to learn whether it's appropriate for people with less experience, 1 to 2 years, to do freelance work. If so, do you recommend freelance sites, probably like Upwork, I'm just guessing, or looking in other areas? And Brian, will get to your question next. So, Michele, freelancing as a super newbie or relative newbie, especially because a lot of boot camps and programs say, hey, we taught you, but you're probably not ready for your first job. Go freelance.
Yeah, I get this question a lot. Typically, I would not recommend it earlier in one's career so that you or they can focus on actually learning and excelling in the craft rather than figuring out things that will be distractions, but that are necessary. So, for example, sales, back end systems, bookkeeping, um, marketing, billing, invoicing, all of those things. That being said, everyone's situation is different. If it's a matter of putting food on the table, that's a different consideration. But if you have the option, I would much rather see newer practitioners working and learning in a team that has some existing practices and systems in place so that you can really focus on building your skill sets, not on those other things. Yeah.
Yeah, and Larry Marine, his comment didn't come up on the screen, so I'm trying to reload my comments, but he said, I just joined in. Per hour has been my more successful model as well. I've never had a retainer, too many variables, user access makes it hard to justify, plan hours and activities, a retainer. Again, I would love a retainer. I am not against them at all. It just hasn't fallen on my head. And as for the should I freelance first thing, I don't know about you, Michelle, but I have found that when a lot of companies bring in a freelancer, they often tend to think about a senior level or higher person. They're thinking of that low ego action hero who can come in and understand a project quickly, know strategically how to approach it, and even if they do have to take some time for domain knowledge, run, run, run. And I find that very often people don't necessarily want the freelancer who hasn't done this before or is still learning. What's your impression?
Absolutely agree. I think other reasons why independents are brought in is because they have that domain knowledge, is because they can hit the ground running, is because they can figure out the culture and the politics and the dynamics quickly. Because if you've been doing it for long enough, that's part of your skill set. It's not just becoming expert in the craft. It's also expert at navigating many different tool stacks, politics, timelines, templates, egos, and things like that. Yeah, that's a really
Yeah,
good
I'm just
point.
trying to write down a couple of questions because my chat system is going wacky. Brian had asked, and we'll circle back to Sophie's comment as well, but Brian had asked, how would a retainer model relate to hourly as far as what to charge?
So I've worked almost exclusively retainers for the last 5 years or so. Um, uh, my favorite retainer models are typically 50% time for a flat rate per month. And that typically works out to what a full-time employee can get done. Because I'm not participating in performance reviews, team meetings, all a lot of distractions, so to speak, that take away from the actual project work. So how does it figure out hourly? It would, for me, I charge less than an hourly rate when I'm on retainer because it is ongoing. It's consistent. So I have a lower rate. So if you were to like divide the hours by the time I'm actually working, it's a cost savings to the employer. And that's typically how retainers work. And my typical retainer engagements are, start anywhere from 3 to 6 months, but they last anywhere from 18 to 24 months.
Great when you can get
So,
it, for sure. And Larry
yeah,
says,
yeah, it
no
really
one
is.
looks, yeah, Larry says, no one looks to be the first patient for a new dentist or freelancer. And Brian says, 1 to 2 years experience as a freelancer, you may not end up with mentors. And that can be true as well, because again, you're expected to be the experienced expert coming in. You're going to know what to do. Maybe you're even the team of one. You're going to hit that ground running. And very often, nobody's checking your work. It's the Michelle show or the Debbie show or things like that.
Yeah, and in even more instances, you're not only running the work, but like you're herding all of the cats, right, to get the work done. Doing the work is actually the easiest part. It's managing all of the stakeholders that can be far more challenging.
That's true as well. And especially when you've grown to the size of my company or yours, where we also have people working for or with us. And so now we have to oversee their work and their time and their needs as well. So that is just managing your freelancing empire, as I call it. Let me ask the question Sophie put up that was on the screen before, and I wrote it down before it slipped away. Sophie wants to know, Michelle, what is your secret for selling the retainer? I guess getting people, do
Um,
your clients prefer that? Like, are they saying, hey, we want to put you on retainer, or are you kind of selling them on it?
95% of my work is all referral based. So whoever was referred me to that person, chances are I came from a retainer relationship. But I will work on standalone projects. That's just not my preference. My preference is to work in a retainer relationship so I can really get to know the team and the product. And I also know, as a researcher, the longer we work together, the more value I can provide, and the more value they receive. So I typically say, like, what kind of help are you looking for? What kind of support are you looking for? And it's either like on one project or an ongoing need. And if it's ongoing need, I say I work on a retainer basis. This has worked really well for me, and here are the reasons why. And I can provide you with, a ton of references. Um, and it's either yay or nay, but I won't. It hasn't been a problem.
Cool. Irena is here, and Irena asks, how do you demonstrate to the client you can bring as much value as someone who works for the company? I've encountered "you don't know enough" bias so far.
I'm not sure I understand. Is this situation where you're trying to like sell yourself to the company, like have them create a freelance or a consulting role in addition to staff?
Yeah, I'm
What's
not
the
sure,
problem we're
Irena.
trying to solve?
Yeah, give us more information on that. I mean, my first impression was that they think that Irena doesn't have as much domain knowledge as the people already working there. It might take her too long to get up to speed. But your question is good as well. Is she trying to convince them to open up a freelancing or consulting position, or is that already open, but they're not sure they want her because they're worried she doesn't have enough domain knowledge? So let's see what she says. The YouTubers are usually 40 seconds behind, so we will have to wait to see what she says. Drum roll. But
If
meanwhile, we
it's
can also go ahead.
sometimes I think not having the domain knowledge is really helpful, because you have such a fresh perspective. The last three studies I did, I had really very little domain knowledge around the space. I learned a ton. Um, but that also speaks to the point of why in a retainer relationship, your value really grows over time because you're building on that foundational knowledge from that first study. So by the time you get to the second study or the third study, you're able to kind of, it's like a domino effect. um, in some instances, maybe having some domain knowledge, would be really helpful. So I'm trying to think of, I've never worked on an aerospace project, right? I'm just trying to like pick something out of the blue. Um, you know, but is my job to really be an expert on aerospace? No. My job is to know how to ask the right questions to the right people in the right way. And if I'm doing my job correctly, my domain experience or lack thereof should be secondary to my craft.
I dig it. I'm certainly with you. Before we get to Schwetz's question, Irena says, it's more the second one. They don't want to share enough and just insist on doing what they already intended to do without my understanding specifically what their problem is. Like they come already with certain questions, but if I want to dig deeper to get a better context, clients get defensive.
Huh. Um, I guess I would approach that in the same way I would a study or discussion guide, and I would have like some probing questions um, prepared that to me would, I think, get in the way of me being able to do really good work. Um, so I wonder if it's either how the question's being asked or the client not having the context of why you're asking that question. I would imagine it's some sort of combination, and to kind of like diagnose that, I think would be helpful. I mean, I
And
wouldn't
I
say, why are you
also,
being an
sorry, go
asshole and
ahead.
not answering my questions? But
Yeah, I tend
Yeah,
to
I
think
mean, there's a delta
if
there.
they're talking to you, if they're talking to Irena, then unless she just showed up at their door and said, let me in, I want to sell you research services, if they're talking to you, they must have some sort of need. There's some problem in the company, whether that problem is we're not meeting some of our goals or we have more research work than the researchers we have. There must be some problem they're having. So sometimes you can just simply start with questions like, you know, what are your struggles? What goals are you not achieving? Or,
Where do
things
you
like
wish you
that.
knew?
Yeah, oh, always a good question. What are the unanswered questions? Irena says, thanks for the answer. Framing your skill as asking questions rather than being in the domain makes sense. Yeah, to me, as I always say, you are there to provide customer intelligence and discover and mitigate risk and waste. You want to make sure you're helping strategies and decisions go in the best direction possible through good research, whether that's generative, evaluative, or both.
Mhm.
I'm going to circle back to Schweiz's question, and she asks, what suggestions would you have for people interested in freelancing to build a client base? What marketing activities do you do? Now we've just heard that you mostly get word of mouth and referrals, but are there any marketing activities you do?
I do. I have a newsletter called Fuel Your Curiosity, which has an outstanding open rate, actually. I can put a link in here for you guys to sign up. So I write quite a bit. Um, and I'm also very active on LinkedIn. Um, and the Ask Like a Pro series also generates a lot of conversation and interest. I do a lot of events also. Um, Next week, I have 3 events. I give back a lot to the community. And I think that, through the newsletter, through the events, through the Ask Like a Pro series, through LinkedIn, um, but I don't actively sell, so to speak. I I talk about I talk about things in the industry that I think are important, or I'll hold events on things, or even like this conversations, podcasts on things that I don't think are um, discussed either openly or often, or um, but I don't have like an outbound kind of sales program or anything like that.
Yeah, and I want to agree there. I don't have a sales program either. And for me, it tends to be word of mouth. Somebody knows somebody. They think that I would be a good match to what they're looking to achieve. Or as Michele said, sometimes it's people stumble on me on LinkedIn because I'm a somebody there. You can decide whether I'm a good somebody or bad somebody, but I'm a somebody there. And also some of my conference speaking. I've definitely gotten some leads and some uh, uh, contracts and clients because someone saw me speak at a conference or heard me on a podcast. So sometimes, I hate to say exposure because really people should be paying you to speak at a conference, but whether or not you're being paid, that exposure can help lead to possible business. And Casey Martin says, content marketing, you give people free value and they see you as credible, so they hire you. That's the best way. And we'll get to Srija's question in a moment. Just some other comments. Larry Marine said, here's a thought. Lacking domain expertise provides an objective perspective that helps you see things that others will miss because they already know too much about the domain and they have biases. And Irena responded, that's a good point. I'm a bit afraid to say that to the clients because they're usually really fond of their domain expertise, but I'll try to see how that goes. You can always try, as Michele said, sometimes I remember speaking to a company once and they said, we only work with geologists. Like if you're going to come be a UX consultant here, you would have to be a UX consultant with at least a degree in geology. And I was like, oh, okay, like that. Okay, no, I have a degree in music and an MBA. Don't know geology. I guess I can't learn it quickly. I understand geology is specialized, so yeah, I need domain knowledge there, but not necessarily in other places. Srija has a great question, and Srija is asking, how do you relate outcomes to UX research work?
Ah, outcomes versus outputs, or
As they
that's a
say.
big thing to me. Words really matter to me. I talk about words a lot and terminology um, in the industry. So outcomes in terms of my clients' outcomes, outcomes in terms of my students' outcomes, outcomes in terms of project. I think there are lots of different ways to think about outcomes, whether they're end user outcomes, whether they're product outcomes, business outcomes, cultural outcomes, um, internal, external outcomes, you name it. How are we talking about them? When will they get measured? What will be measured? Planned outcomes, surprised outcomes. I could talk all day about outcomes.
I better get a pillow and a hot chocolate. This one's going to run long. Lots of outcomes and things we can measure to prove our value.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I still have that lingering post-COVID cough. I apologize for the coughing. Um, okay, let's see. Jason asks, could you speak more to how you differentiate between freelancing and consulting, and how do you apply or present your research skill set and outcomes differently for these two services?
What was the first question?
Yeah, do you see a difference between freelancing and consulting?
I do. I think freelancing is sort of like the crawl, walk, run. I think that's at the beginning stages, and consulting has more of a back end system to it. It's more established. There might be more people. There might be other entities, higher numbers. I think of freelancing as more of like a one man show or woman show, excuse me, one person show, one entity show. And consulting is typically being more strategic, more operationalized, more, more. But it takes a little while to get there.
I would agree. Even though I sometimes use those words a little bit interchangeably, there is a difference between them. Because when I used to live in San Francisco, I used to joke that I was freelancer to the stars because a lot of companies had me on speed email, and I would be brought in usually when somebody just needed the butt kicked of some aspect of their project. Like, oh, you need an actual prototype for really good usability testing, just bring in Debbie. She's going to knock that out of the park. And so sometimes I was just brought in to do a very fixed, finite thing. Sometimes it was so fixed and finite, they didn't necessarily want a lot of my critical thinking. Sometimes it was, I was really just making prototypes of other people's designs, and it was a freelancing gig. Sometimes they did want my critical thinking. But I feel like when I'm being brought in as a consultant, that word does mean something a little bit different and have some weight with it. Whereas Michele said, you are expected to be a little bit more strategic. You are expected to be able to understand and plan that project both at the strategic and tactical level, and maybe to be more of a kind of partner to them where you have a real point of view, you have critical thinking, and there are things you're recommending, even if they might mean that you're pushing back against somebody. Larry says, a consultant borrows your watch to tell you what time it is and then sells you back the watch. Oy, dad jokes aplenty today. And then the other half of Jason's question was, how do you apply or present your research skill set or outcomes differently for the freelancing service versus the consulting service?
I think it really depends on a couple of things. One major consideration would be the UX maturity of the client, um, and what they're looking to achieve. And in that sort of dancing evaluation period of time, I'm also evaluating how much of this is me doing versus me educating along the way, because that will definitely include some extra time and effort. And it's not to say that that's a detractor, or those types of projects or clients aren't any less attractive to me. It's more of like my own assessment of what's it going to take for me to do a really great job here. Um, and I will speak, candidly about that during those earlier discussions, and certainly as I'm building a proposal. So I'm taking all of that into consideration in the dating phase, so to speak.
Thanks for that. And Seth Mbele is here. Everybody, Seth is the interview, chapter 24 in my new book, Customers Know You Suck. He closes out the book because he is so fantastic. So please check out the book and check him out. Seth says, my understanding, freelance is mainly concerned with tasks and deliverables. Consulting is concerned with expert guidance and shaping outcomes. Sometimes.
I, yeah, I think that can be applicable. I wouldn't want to put such a tight box, around both of those. I think that there's some fuzzy air. There's some gray area in between there too, and where on some projects you might be in a box, and on other projects you might not, or in some phases of projects it might be more boxy, and on others might be less boxy, might be more amorphous. I should say.
Amoeba shaped. Yes, thank you for that. So let's talk, while we wait for some other questions from the live viewers, let's talk a little bit about some of the pros and cons of freelancing and consulting. Maybe can we start with some of the pros before we rain on everyone's parade?
Sure. I definitely think freedom of choice is really, really attractive to people. People want to pick and choose who they want to work with, or the types of projects they want to work on, when they work, where they work, their pay, their rate. Um, uh, they want more control. I think that is very attractive. Also, freelance and consulting tend to be shorter commitments. Um, Shorter commitments um, does translate into better pay, because there's more risk involved or less security. But there's some downside to that too, which we'll talk about in the cons. Um, I think the pride of accomplishment also plays into that. Finding a successful project feels great, right? Increasing your diversified knowledge set or industry knowledge and value, is incredibly rewarding. Um, One of the things that I love is working across many different industries and domains. I like that context switching, and I like that learning. I'm a learner, so that is really attractive to me. And I'm at the point too in my career where I'm not looking to work for somebody else. I've been on my own for 12 years. Um, uh, but for people who are looking, to maybe freelance or consult in between, I think it's a great way to sort of date before you get married, right? See if you like this team, see if you like the culture, see if you like the the product, right? I mean, I've been in some instances, actually only only 3 times in 12 years. One, I really didn't like the product. I just didn't like I love the people, but I just didn't like the product. In 2 instances where I didn't like the people. Now in none of those situations was I looking to evaluate for full-time work, but sure, if I was, boy, was I glad, to have had that experience. Oh, Debbie, I can't hear you. I lost your audio.
No, sorry, I had muted because I was coughing before and then I forgot to unmute.
Oh,
And now I'm having a lozenge, so I apologize everybody for lozenge sounds. Hopefully it's positive ASMR and not negative lozenge sounds. And so I was saying, Shweta, we'll get to your question in a moment. I just want to talk to Michele about some of the pros and cons first, and then we'll circle back to your question. I agree with all of those pros. I'm not sure I have too much to add other than I would kind of strengthen one of the things you said, reinforce it more and say, I think that especially when you get to a certain point of your career, you feel a little bit more like you have the power to say no. If there is a wacky team, if there is a wacky project, if there is a wacky industry, and for whatever reason you're not comfortable with it or the negotiations aren't going well, unless, as Michele said, you need to put that food on the table, you have the power to say, this project isn't right for me. Whereas when you work full time for someone, it's very hard to be like, yeah, I don't think I want to work on this. Give me something else. Very often you're assigned to that, and it is what it is.
yeah. Yeah, that power of choice is really, really powerful. Power of choice. It's empowering. Freedom. Freedom of choice. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think a lot of that comes with confidence. And that confidence is something that's built over time, which is another reason why, to the question earlier, what sort of advice do I give, to people who are newer in their career path about freelancing versus consulting. It's like, I would much prefer that you're in an existing team for a period of time for a variety of reasons. One is for that mentorship. Another is so that you can focus on, really building your craft and not worrying about back end distractions or sales or marketing or invoicing. And a third is to build that experience so you can build that confidence. Absolutely.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about freelancing and consulting cons or things people need to be aware of or take into consideration. What are some of yours?
Yeah. There's less job security, right? You can be let go more easily than full-time employees. Although I have not experienced this. In fact, I've been on several teams where there have been layoffs while I was consulting. Um, and my consulting contracts were renewed even after layoffs. One thing to note is that the income or the funds for a consultant come from a different line item in the GL than funds for salary. Um, so that's something to consider, especially in these massive layoffs we're going on here. But less job security for sure. And it also requires you to budget. It requires you to budget to cover time in between jobs, to cover time for vacation, for sick time. Um, that's one of the reasons why I prefer the retainer model. Not only does it allow me to build that relationship over time, but it's also allows me to plan better. It allows me more financial security. Um, and I recommend having diversified income streams as well, which I do um, through the Ask Like a Pro cohort and the consulting and some other means, which I'm happy to discuss. Um, and some other cons are the amount of time you're going to spend on that job hunt or securing that new client, right? And that comes down to selling and negotiating, which is something you really don't do once you have landed a full-time job, right? So again, the retainer work for me is really attractive because I don't have to spend a lot of time, or energy, on the selling or the negotiating for the retainer clients.
Yeah, thanks for those. I want to add to that. I wrote down a couple of things that for some people are cons, and that's going to be kind of the financial side in that you normally have to pay your own taxes. If you're used to a regular employee job, especially in America, they take your taxes out, and hopefully at the end of the year you don't owe any taxes. And that was pretty easy. The company kind of did that for you, and if you calculate it right, you can get a refund rather than owe, and many people don't like to owe. But when you are a freelancer or a consultant, very often, even outside of America, you're paid differently. You're typically paid without taxes being withheld. They're not going to pull out healthcare numbers or Social Security or other social services. If you negotiate X dollars an hour, you get X dollars an hour. If you get X a month, you get X a month. But then some freelancers and consultants are surprised by what their taxes end up being, because now you have to pay taxes on that money. And I remember I took on a freelancer a few years ago. He had just been laid off. And I said, what hourly rate do you want? And he said, well, when I do the math of what my annual salary was at my last job, I was probably making about 70 an hour. So I think I want 70 an hour. And I said, well, then you did the math incorrectly, because you have to remember that if I pay you 70, you're probably only keeping 70% of that. You could owe roughly 30%, depending upon your state and region and country, in taxes. I can't pay you if
Plus
I paid you
self-employment tax.
right. If
Plus
you're
self-employment tax.
exactly, yeah. If I 1099 you and you have to pay taxes on this, you're going to be extremely surprised by what's left over. You've got to do the math differently. And he was like, oh my God, thank you. And so we agreed on a higher number for him. Not everybody will be so nice, so do your own math correctly. But
Definitely, and factor into things like health insurance. I mean, my health insurance, I think, is $780 a month. And it's not like I have a crazy plan and I'm the only one on the plan. I mean, you do have your own expenses, things like your cell phone and your internet and your heat and your new computers and software subscriptions, um, uh, paying an accountant, um, lots of other things. When you become more bigger, more successful, more when you grow, I guess is what I'm trying to say, you'll also acquire sort of like a team of people to rely on, to help you navigate certain situations. And that will probably include an attorney, a bookkeeper, maybe a writer, or someone to help maintain your website, or manage social media, or you kind of like build out a team, and all of those people have to get paid too.
yeah, so the other things that I had on my list were insurance. I find there are some companies who will not consider me as a vendor or for consulting work if I cannot show that I am insured. Now, I have a C corporation of the state of Arizona. I also have an Italian SRL, for those of you in Italy. Both of them are insured. I think I have 2 to 4 million of insurance, and normally that's the amount that I'm told to prove. So, and that costs me money to have insurance, knowing I'm never going to use it, but I have to have it anyway. And if you decide to have a business entity, whether that's SRL, LLC, whatever it is where you are, those things cost money as well. And just to add to that, Sophie said, freelancing is running a business. Stop thinking like an employee. Learn what the rules are for businesses. Learn about corporation tax, VAT, pension, and insurance contributions, and personal tax. So those are definitely, I would say that and job security are some of the cons.
Mhm.
And Seth is talking
Business
about how,
insurance for sure.
yeah, Seth is saying how bad the lack of labor protections are in the USA opposed to the rest of the world. That might be true, but that is a whole other show. Let me roll back to Shweta's question, and then we've got Irena's question. Shweta said, I'm curious about how UX research or design can be scoped into fixed price projects. I spoke with a couple of clients who wanted a fixed price, but I was hesitant because UX has so many unknowns and the scope can change unless everything has been defined up front requirements-wise. What do you think there?
Hmm. So I'm in this situation often, and whether it's for a retainer client or whether it's for a project-based client, I'm using those first 3 or 4 conversations to really understand what are they looking to learn, how will the learnings be applied, when do they need these learnings, what level of confidence are they looking for, what what is their level of UX maturity? Who wants to know the answers to these questions? What skills and resources are available? What capabilities? What sort of budget is available? Then it's going to contribute to maybe whether we can hire some special help or use a particular platform, or certainly influence the recruit. So I'm kind of doing my due diligence in order to craft what that proposal might look like. For a retainer client, it's more about the timeline. Sure. I mean, we can have, you know, we can do the whole universe, but what's actually needed and what's feasible and what's reasonable and what do we need to know next is more about how I approach those retainer conversations.
And Shweta, there's a video in our micro lessons playlist. Everybody, don't forget to subscribe here on the YouTube channel and like and comment. It just helps out the channel. In the micro lessons chapter, there's something that I did about planning projects, and I show you how I plan projects, how I price them out, and how many unknowns are things that we can foresee and predict, because once you have that much experience, you've seen it, you know it. I like to call them predictable unforeseeables. We were not too sure what will go wrong, but we know something will, so we've got to just build that in. Now again, I'm working with hourly or day rates, and if you want to turn that into a fixed price project, you certainly can, but if you watch that show, you'll see how I approach the pricing in my own way, and you can just turn that into your way. And Sophie reminds us, make sure you have at least 3 months cash flow before you start. And Sophie, in a down economy like this, I would challenge people to have more than 3 months cash flow, because we just had a new client sign our contract this week at Delta CX, so we're really excited to be starting a new project. But before that, the last time I worked was early July. And I've had to live off savings for 6-7 months. And so while 3 months can be a good cushion, certainly in a down economy, I tend to recommend 6 months or more. And that can be scary to people, the idea of not working for 6 months. But certainly in an economy like this with all these layoffs, it's too possible, too possible. Let me jump over to Irena's question. Oh, go ahead, Michelle.
I just wanted to circle back about the stakeholder management and planning. I agree with you that something will go wrong, something will go sideways, and it's not something to be really bummed about. What I like to say in the Ask Like a Pro program is it's not if, it's when. And the when may show up in the planning phase, or the when may show up in the presenting phase, or it may show up anytime in between. But the art of what we do in terms of UX or user research is by its nature dynamic. And there's nothing static about the problems that we're exploring, the people that we are designing for, our stakeholders, our competition, politics, the economy. I mean, this is like the most dynamic, alive human thing ever. So yeah, it's not about if it's going to, something's going to go sideways. It's when something's going to go sideways, and what is that? The first workshop in the Ask Like a Pro series is called Plan. And it's focused exactly on this. It's focused on building that great relationship with your stakeholder up front so that you can plan for these things. You can plan your project knowingly. You can plan for the assumptions or hypotheses to be tested and the unknowns and things that might go sideways. Because again, it's not an if, it's a when. But that's also what makes, doing what we do so fantastic and it's exciting, right? Because we never know.
Thanks for that. I want to circle back before I read Casey's question. I want to circle back to Irena's question because she's been waiting. We have 10 more minutes. Irena asks, when you negotiate with clients, what cues do you look for to understand whether a client or project might be difficult? In other words, how do you know you shouldn't accept an offer to do a project? I'm asking because sometimes we can be eager to do some work and might overlook something due to the excitement.
Yeah. Um, I'm a relator. I'm a people person. Um, and like most researchers, I think you have a heightened sense of um, and passion for understanding other people. And I use a lot of my research skills unconsciously to assess someone's attitude and behavior around this project or this question set. Um, I'm looking for, does what they say match with what they do? I'm looking to understand um, what, how will this information help them, or how will the learnings be applied? I'm looking to make sure that there is enough time in the roadmap available for the research learnings to actually be considered, right? I'm not interested in doing research for research sake. I'm not interested in helping anyone check a box. I don't care who you are. That's just so I'm looking for an alignment in terms of morals. I'm looking for an alignment in terms of interest, and also availability. So I can be pretty picky at this point, and I'm very grateful for that. Um, but I would say, like, does it feel good? Do you like this person? Do you like the product and service that they are offering? Does it align with your morals? Do you feel like this is something you want to be a part of? Is something you want to contribute to? Something you can really get behind, and build a relationship with? Um, and use your spidey senses. Maybe do a little empathy map on your interactions with them in terms of what they think, feel, say, and do. But I wouldn't take any project just to take the project, unless getting food on the table really was the bottom issue. It's gotta feel good, and don't
Yeah,
don't be an asshole.
one of the things I look for is, are they interested in my expertise, or do they see me as a pair of hands who are just going to come in and do something? As Michelle said, someone wants to check off a box. So if I'm having some early discussions with them and I say, I think it's really important to speak to 30 people from your target audiences, and they say, no, we should really just talk to 8. Then I'm thinking, uh-oh, that's really cut way down. They're not listening to some of my suggestions here. And what I found over the years is when I used to say yes to some of these projects that were, let's just say, not ideal, I found that sometimes at some point there was something that I created that let's just say didn't go as well as it could have. And the client was usually just like shocked and horrified that I'm the expert and I didn't make a perfect design. My design should be flawless. There should be nothing wrong with it. And I've just found that when I don't get to do good research and I don't get to do research-informed design, or I'm asked to guess at some stuff, I end up with resentful clients. And as soon as they resent me, that relationship is pretty much over. They're not going to hire me again. They're not going to recommend me to other people. So I've started saying no where I think that the client is adjusting the project to be something that they're just eventually going to feel resentful about. We paid you all this money and you couldn't guess what our information architecture should be. So I stay away from those. I think that goes in Michelle's spidey sense bucket. We've got way more questions than I think we're going to have time for. Can you stay a few minutes late by any chance?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Happy to.
thanks. Okay.
It's a really good conversation, actually.
Yeah, so Seth says, the number one red flag for me with a new client is when the language deliberately undervalues what you can do for them. We just need a little bit of this. No, thank you. So circling back to Casey's question, Casey says, do you have suggestions for software that makes stakeholder management or organization easier? I've started using Gmail plugins to create sales funnels and track deals, but once a deal is won and the project begins, I'm curious if you use something to manage the stakeholder of that specific project.
Great question. I would say one of the pros and the cons of being independent is the context switching, and that includes the tool stacks. Most of my clients use some form of the G Suite or Google Suite. Some of my clients use some form of Microsoft Suite, but all of them have very different project management systems, from Airtable to Monday to Google Sheets to, and then, archiving and recruiting. And I mean, they're just all over the board. Um, I have found what works best for me is to ask them what they use and then use that. Not try to change their behavior for something that already exists. And adapt to their behaviors, which also is one more reason why I like retainer relationships too, because it might be unfamiliar to me. Like, I'm not a real database person, I just don't think that way. So if I have to use some sort of databasey kind of thing, I'm going to invest the time to learn it and use it to the best of my ability. But I also don't want to be like learning one of those things every other month. Um, and especially because each client, I mean, while they might, for example, like 5 clients might all use Airtable, but they might use Airtable very differently also. So I I have this phrase in the Yes Like a Pro series where I say, like, Wonder Twin powers activate, form of, the easiest researcher to work with ever. And I'm constantly thinking of the UX of working with me, and I want to be as easy as possible to work with. And one of those things is to remove those barriers. So I'll use your tools and your stacks unless there is like some legitimate reason. And oftentimes there is. I mean, sometimes as a consultant, you don't have access to their full tool stack or their full intranet or their full archives or something like that. So there's a lot of improv that goes along the way.
Yeah, and I agree. Sometimes you are adjusting to their tools. Very often, the way that my consulting work goes is they're saying, "Look, we really hope you're going to project manage your own project." And I say, "Yes, absolutely. We have project management included." My particular tools are mostly Monday.com, not sponsored. I just paid them for another year. I'm a huge fan of Monday.com, and if you watch my How I Plan and Manage Projects in the Micro Lessons playlist, you'll see how I use Monday.com for that stuff. I'm also paying for G Suite or Google Workspace or whatever they're calling it now. We use Miro for some things. We're using Dovetail for some things. But when it comes to managing the project itself, from the timing and the tasks and keeping the stakeholder advised on the progress or any blockers, I'm usually doing that in Monday.com. I know we're just about out of time. I think we had one question from Irena. Let me know if I missed other questions from other people. Irena said, do you work on projects where your stakeholder on the client side was a researcher? How was that?
Yes, I on several projects actually. I'm being brought in to augment an existing research team. So, um, my primary contact might be a researcher or a team that no longer has research support. There's pros and cons with it. I mean, I don't think it's any better or any worse. Some of the pros and cons are, you know, uh, well, first, let's hope that they're a talented researcher, because it's not just because they're a researcher doesn't mean they're a good researcher. Um, and I mean, assuming they are, that there's a lot of shorthand that you can talk about, a lot of kind of backroom, secondary research kind of catch up, and data triangulation will or should be expedited for sure. But uh, I haven't had any cons. The only con I can think of is one time, the researcher was pretty junior, so she wasn't that much of a help to me.
Yeah, I dig it. And we've had some of the same stories. When Larry and I got brought in 2020 to work with Etsy, it was because even though they had a large team of researchers, everybody was stretched too thin, and they were looking to bring in more great researchers to take on a pretty big project that nobody had the time for. So we were working with I don't think we worked with researchers on that one because they didn't have enough of them and they were still hiring some research managers, but we did work with, I think, a product director and a product designer and a couple of other people. Actually, we worked with Abby Covert on that one when she was at Etsy. So yeah, I agree with Michele. When you have somebody who understands the value of research and they're bringing you in because they know you're going to do a good job on this, that's beautiful. When you have somebody who doesn't totally get research, like some of these startups I've been talking to lately, some of them get it, some of them don't. I had one startup tell me, after they saw my proposal, they were like, but we don't need research. We can just do like a 2-day on-site and decide what our features are. And I was like, oh, that's probably a job I might say no to, because if this startup is having trouble with product market fit or adoption, satisfaction, retention, I don't want to go in and guess at designs. I want to be evidence-based and research informed. And, and that's my choice and privilege, #privilege, to say potentially no to that project if they don't come around on the research, which I hope they will. So yep, I know we're out of time. So Michele, any last things you want to tell people about or where they can find you and follow you?
Definitely. LinkedIn, please connect with me there. And then I also put a link to my Feel Your Curiosity newsletter in the chat. We're holding 3 more events this month. Really great events. One is all about advanced video editing for research. One is all about product messaging in research. And another is about the Ask Like a Pro series. Our next cohort starts in 2.5 or 3 weeks. So I hope to see you at some of those events. Thanks, Debbie, for having me. Thanks for the great questions, everyone. I look forward
thanks for coming up with this topic and reaching out to me. Real quickly, a reminder for everybody. First of all, have a super weekend. Monday is going to be a show. People have requested that I do a show on my argument pyramid. So I'll be doing a show on that. It should be fun and light and wacky. Tuesday is going to be Office Hours Ask Us Anything with Dr. Nick, which is always on fire. Hopefully my internet stays on this time. Wednesday is the Customers Know You Suck book club. We'll be looking at Chapter 8, which is all about metrics. You don't have to have read Chapter 8 or any of the other chapters to join in. Just join our Slack or Discord at deltacx.com/links, and you'll see the link to join the Google Meet in the live events channel in both of those. Thursday, you audience have requested that I talk more about how research and researchers pay for themselves. I'm going to show you some of my new slides on that on the 16th, hopefully some ammunition you can use at your job. And of course, Friday will be critical thinking, where I think I'm not only going to be going through the things you've all been sending me through deltacx.com/links, but I think I'm going to also talk about the something difficult I was going through last night that I mentioned on in the Slack universe, though completely vaguely. I think I'm going to want to talk more about it on Friday and turn it into a discussion and see what some people think about what I was struggling with. So, vulnerability. So anyway, I'm going to say goodbye and wave a lot and thank everybody for coming. Thank Michele for her great ideas and advice, and have a super weekend and see you Monday. Bye. Customer centricity as business intelligence. Visit deltacx.com to learn why we are